the question was, what is Taylorism and how did it influence project management? And I think that's an interesting question because Taylorism, let's quantify that first. Taylorism it's the name of a gentleman called Frederick Winslow Taylor, who back in the 1880s, 1890s, he was kind of like the thought leader, the management consultant of the time. And he worked with all of these big factory owners. He did a time and motion study about the work, trying to figure out how do we get better at delivering more stuff. Because in those days, the outcomes were guaranteed, right? Because you had a factory that made clocks, and you know you're going to get clocks out the other end of the factory. We just want more clocks, supply and demand. But in that world, during the Industrial Revolution, the demand was much higher than the supply. So we had very, very sparse markets, not so much competition. We didn't have that globalization. So if you were making clocks in Europe, you were selling if you made clocks in the UK, you were probably selling in the UK. If you made clocks in China, you were probably selling in China, right? They didn't have that globalization. So competition was very low. And customers didn't really know much about the products that they were buying. So they just bought what they were provided, right? They weren't asking for different things. They weren't trying to get different stuff. So you had this very low dynamic, low competition marketplace, and a whole bunch of tools and practices were developed around this space. So Frederick Winslow Taylor, that's what we call it, Taylorism, developed a bunch of these techniques, started developing them, and one of the fundamental bases that they worked with was because people doing monotonous factory work, because they disconnect from the work, you find that they try everything they can not to work. So there's this famous quote from Taylor that's, let me think, not a competent worker can be ne'er a competent worker can be found that does not devote a considerable amount of time to studying just how slowly they can work and still convince their employer they're going at a good pace. And I'm sure listening to this, you're all thinking of those companies that you've worked for and with that have that ethos at their heart, that employees are inherently untrustworthy, they're inherently not going to do their job unless we're watching them, treating people like factory workers, right? And we need to keep an eye on them. We need a foreman to keep an eye on the people, and then maybe we need managers to keep an eye on the foreman and managers to keep an eye on those managers, depending on how big we get. And hierarchy is born, right? You get hierarchies, and then because we're going to put the thinkers at the top of the organization and the doers at the bottom of the organization, because the doers don't need to think, right? They're just making more stuff. We know what we're going to create. We're creating clocks. Then we can create these hierarchical steering based organizations where budget comes from the top, decisions are made at the top, direction comes from the top. And then that kind of progressed through into through the Gantt chart in 1906 from Henry Gantt through into the 1950s, where the US industrial military complex took a hold of many of these ideas and started incorporating them into the way they work. So you want to divide people into ability-based groups. You want to standardize the processes that they do, train that group only in those processes. And hey-ho, we ended up with departments across our organizations, with the sales department and the marketing department and the coding department and the testing department and the operations department, right? Let's keep them separate, train them only in those ability-based groups. So out of those ideas was born those traditional project management methods. Now, a lot of work has been done recently to try and curtail or morph many of those traditional outlooks to a more people-focused, because it was a stuff-focused outlook. And but that stuff-focused outlook is still at the heart of a lot of those techniques. Yes, I do know fantastic project managers that don't focus on the stuff, they focus on the people, and they get great results. But in my experience, those folks are super rare. They're bucking a trend. They're not the mass-produced project manager that you find out in the ether. And what's happening is that plan becomes the gold standard rather than planning becoming the gold standard. So Taylorism is really the source of, if you read about Taylorism, you read about the scientific management method, you'll see that influence going through all of the stuff up until the modern era, even through the Lean Toyota production system, right, which was an adaptation of those techniques for the more modern world of the 1950s, when markets were getting more crowded, right? So they needed new techniques to be able to move even faster. And that was a Lean Toyota production system. But as we move into the modern world, and even 50, 60, 70 years ago, there weren't really any of these markets that were low competition left, right? Everything's high competition, high demand, high variability in all the things that we do. People starting to demand custom capabilities from their organizations, which is why car manufacturers are increasingly adopting agile practices so that they can start delivering these custom capabilities dynamically and quickly to their customers, incorporating the design of the products into the actual delivery of the products rather than keeping them as separate things, right? Design it and then deliver it. They need to constantly be adapting and changing. So Taylorism created was the source of those traditional project management practices, but there are many practices, tools in traditional project management that are still just as valid today. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, but try and figure out how to increase your adaptability, reduce your bureaucracy, reduce the plan, increase planning, and deliver more value. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please like, follow, and subscribe. I always reply to comments, and if you want to have a chat about this or anything else, Agile, Scrum, or DevOps, then please book a coffee with me through NKDAgility.